October 1944. Camp Kahuku, Oahu, Hawaii. The tropical morning air hung heavy with moisture as Hiroshi Tanaka, a third-generation rice farmer from Niigata Prefecture, stood frozen before the American farm manager. The words just spoken to him defied everything he had been told about captivity. "What vegetables would you recommend for this soil?" the American had asked, genuinely seeking his expertise. After 8 months fighting in the Philippines, surrendering only when his entire unit faced annihilation, this simple agricultural question represented impossibility made real. Across American prison camps that autumn, 5,383 Japanese prisoners with agricultural backgrounds would confront a reality that contradicted everything imperial propaganda had taught them about American barbarism. They discovered a nation where farmers made decisions about crops rather than following strict governmental mandates, where soil conservation mattered more than immediate yield, where producing food meant feeding communities rather than solely supporting the military. These fundamental agricultural principles, farming practices that most Japanese rural communities had never experienced, would systematically demolish imperial ideology more effectively than any re-education program. The mathematics of agricultural democracy were being written in soil and seed, in irrigation and harvest, revealing an American productive capacity that rendered Japanese deprivation not noble sacrifice, but unnecessary suffering. What began as confusion at American farming practices would evolve into complete philosophical transformation: the soil's promise. The surrender of Japanese forces on Saipan and in the Philippines during summer 1944 brought approximately 12,000 Japanese soldiers into American captivity. These battle-hardened fighters who had defended imperial territory with fanatical determination expected execution or torture as prisoners. Japanese military doctrine had prepared them for honorable death, not surrender. Imperial propaganda had warned that captured soldiers would face unspeakable American cruelties. Instead, within days of processing, Japanese prisoners with agricultural backgrounds found themselves approached by American authorities seeking their farming knowledge. Military records from Camp Kahuku show that 267 Japanese prisoners with agricultural experience were interviewed about crop selection, soil management, and growing techniques. This systematic cataloging of enemy expertise began immediately, though its psychological impact would only be understood later. A Japanese sergeant later testified to international observers, "We expected to be worked to death as prisoners. Instead, the Americans consulted us as if we were agricultural advisors." This contradiction about American intentions began our re-education. The transportation of POWs to agricultural areas provided intensive instruction in American abundance. Hawaii's plantation system, California's vast Central Valley farms, and the Mississippi Delta operations demonstrated agricultural scale beyond Japanese comprehension. These operations, producing at unprecedented rates, a single California farm often exceeding the acreage of an entire Japanese village, transported the prisoners' understanding of possibility. Naval records show that prisoner agricultural assignments match skills rather than security classifications. Men who had grown rice in Japan were assigned to similar operations in California's Sacramento Valley. Those with vegetable farming experience found themselves consulting on Hawaii's diversified agriculture programs. The military's Agricultural Coordination Office, established in April 1944, maintained detailed records of prisoner agricultural backgrounds and assigned them accordingly, prioritizing expertise over punishment. Most remarkably, documented accounts confirm that Japanese POWs received agricultural training while imprisoned. The University of Hawaii's extension program provided instructional materials translated into Japanese. The Camp Shelby agricultural program in Mississippi included weekly classes on American farming techniques, soil conservation, and mechanical equipment operation. For men who hadn't seen motorized farm equipment before, these mechanical harvesters, tractors, and irrigation pumps defied understanding. When camps established working farms, Japanese POWs encountered an America that imperial propaganda had declared impossible. The Camp Livingston agricultural project in Louisiana covered 400 acres with modern irrigation, producing more vegetables daily than many Japanese villages harvested monthly. At the port facilities where this produce arrived, prisoners glimpsed the American food distribution network that handled more volume daily than major Japanese cities managed weekly. Military procurement records from 1944 show these operations produced substantial quantities. Camp Shelby's farm harvested 175,000 pounds of vegetables in summer 1944 alone. The journey from prisoner to agricultural consultant provided further education. Unlike the forced labor camps of Imperial Japan, Japanese POWs received fair compensation. Documented payment records show prisoners earned 80 cents daily for agricultural work, matching the Geneva Convention standards. Prisoners discovered this wasn't special treatment, but standard American practice. The prison camp agricultural system established across America placed POWs in positions that exceeded mere labor. Camp Kahuku in Hawaii, typical of the larger operations, included Japanese POWs in planning meetings, crop selection discussions, and harvest scheduling. But the compensation system delivered the deepest impact. According to Army Quartermaster records, agricultural POWs received production bonuses when harvests exceeded quotas. Tanaka, initially suspicious of American intentions, found himself standing in fields he helped plan, growing vegetables using methods he helped select, earning wages he could spend. The radical notion of agricultural self-determination, alien to Imperial Japan's controlled agricultural system, began reshaping his understanding of society itself. As he later wrote in censored correspondence, "They ask what I think we should plant. They speak of feeding people as if it were the purpose of farming, not merely supporting the military. This place grows more than rice and vegetables. It grows questions." January 1945, Stockton Assembly Center, California. The massive John Deere tractor roared to life under the tentative hand of Masao Iwata, a former tenant farmer from Kagoshima. His calloused fingers, developed through decades of manual labor in rice paddies, gripped the unfamiliar steering wheel as the machine lurched forward. This single piece of American farm equipment could accomplish in 1 hour what would require 20 Japanese farmers working an entire day. The American supervisor merely nodded and stepped back, allowing Iwata to navigate the machine through carefully plotted furrows stretching toward the horizon. The agricultural education of Japanese prisoners accelerated through winter 1945 as POW labor shortages intensified American interest in maximizing prisoner productivity. At farming operations across Hawaii, California, and Arkansas, Japanese POWs encountered mechanization that rendered their traditional farming knowledge simultaneously valuable and obsolete. The cultural foundations of Japanese agriculture, intensive human labor, meticulous hand cultivation, and exhaustive soil utilization, confronted American industrial farming with its mechanization, chemical fertilization, and vast single-crop operations. Military agricultural records document this technological disparity in stark terms. A standard American farm in 1945 averaged 1 to 2 tractors per operation, while mechanized equipment remained virtually non-existent on Japanese farms. Chemical fertilizer application in America averaged 200 pounds per acre annually, while Japanese farmers relied primarily on night soil and composting. Irrigation systems in California's Central Valley could deliver water to 7,000 acres controlled by a single farmer, while the average Japanese farm occupied just 2.5 acres of intensively cultivated land. At Camp Clarinda in Iowa, Japanese prisoners worked farms where single wheat fields stretched beyond visual limits. Agricultural records show these operations produced 45 bushels per acre using mechanized planting and harvesting, compared to Japanese yields of 22 bushels per acre, requiring 5 times the human labor. One prisoner, documented in camp records only as T. Yamamoto, reportedly walked the perimeter of a 640-acre field and returned to the barracks visibly shaken. "One American field," he told fellow prisoners, "is larger than my entire village's farmland." The stark contrast extended beyond simple scale. Japanese POWs discovered American soil conservation practices that contradicted their experience. Where Japanese farmers maximized production through double and triple cropping that depleted soil, American operations demonstrated crop rotation, contour plowing, and fallow periods. At Camp Livingston's agricultural operation, prisoners witnessed deliberate fallowing of productive fields, an incomprehensible luxury to farmers from land-scarce Japan. Agricultural extension services represented another revelation. Japanese agricultural prisoners at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, worked alongside county extension agents from Mississippi State University, who regularly visited to conduct soil tests, offer planting advice, and introduce new varieties. The concept that scientific research institutions existed primarily to support farmers contradicted the Japanese experience of top-down agricultural mandates from Tokyo. University-developed hybrid corn varieties at Camp Shelby yielded 115 bushels per acre, triple what many Japanese prisoners had achieved at home using traditional varieties. Farm credit systems further challenged Japanese agricultural understanding. POWs working at the Gila River Relocation Center's agricultural operations in Arizona learned that surrounding farms operated through bank financing rather than inherited wealth or feudal arrangement. Land ownership patterns revealed through extension service lectures showed that 65% of American farms were owner-operated, contrasting sharply with Japan, where tenant farmers represented nearly half the agricultural workforce. The democratic distribution of agricultural capital, financing available to qualified farmers regardless of lineage, contradicted Japanese agricultural hierarchy. Captain Lewis Mitchell, agricultural coordinator for the Western Defense Command's POW program, documented the technical challenges in his March 1945 report. Japanese prisoners show exceptional skill in transplanting and hand cultivation, but require substantial training on mechanized equipment. Most have never operated gasoline engines of any kind. Their learning curve, however, exceeds expectations. After initial reluctance, many have become enthusiastic about American methods. At Camp Clarinda's demonstration farm, prisoners viewed operations that industrialized agricultural processes Japanese farmers perform by hand. Mechanical transplanters set 20,000 seedlings hourly, compared to the 1,500 that an experienced Japanese farmer might manage. Mechanical harvesters gathered crops at rates that made traditional harvest festivals, a week-long village endeavor in Japan, seem primitive by comparison. Sprinkler irrigation systems delivered precisely calibrated water volumes, contrasting with the labor-intensive Japanese practice of manually flooding fields. The technological revelation extended to crop diversification. California's agricultural diversity, over 200 commercial crop varieties, contrasted sharply with the rice-dominated Japanese countryside. At Camp Beale, California, Japanese agricultural prisoners cultivated 32 vegetable varieties simultaneously on the camp's 640-acre farm. Most had grown fewer than 10 crop types in their entire farming careers. This diversity occurred not through governmental mandate, but market demand, introducing prisoners to consumer-driven agricultural planning. As spring approached, Japanese prisoners with agricultural backgrounds found themselves increasingly integrated into American farming operations. At Camp Kahuku, Hiroshi Tanaka no longer simply provided consultation, but supervised fellow prisoners in implementing growing plans he had helped develop. His hand-drawn field maps became operational directives. His varietal selections determined what was planted. This transition from prisoner to participant, from enemy to essential worker, accelerated his psychological transformation. As another agricultural prisoner confided to a camp interpreter, "In Japan, I followed orders about what to grow, when to grow it, and how much to deliver to the government. Here, they ask what the soil needs. They treat the land as a living thing to be nurtured rather than a resource to be exploited. This small difference contains an entire philosophy." April 1945, Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Morning dew still clung to rows of tender green shoots as Sergeant Kenji Yasuda surveyed the 20-acre vegetable plot his team had transformed from bare soil to productive farmland in just 6 weeks. His hands, once trained to hold a rifle, now carried a clipboard with precise planting schedules and yield projections. Across the field, 30 Japanese prisoners methodically tended rows of eggplant, cabbage, and daikon radish, crops they had specifically requested to grow. The American guards, positioned at the field's perimeter, seemed more interested in the farming techniques than preventing escape. By spring 1945, Japanese POWs with agricultural backgrounds were actively managing significant farming operations throughout American detention facilities. Military records documented 27 major POW farming projects operating across the United States, with the largest concentrations in Hawaii, California, and the Mississippi Delta. These operations ranged from the massive 640-acre diversified farm at Camp Beale to smaller specialized operations like Camp Shelby's 120-acre vegetable production facility. Collectively, these prisoner-managed farms produced over 3.2 million pounds of food during the 1945 growing season. Camp Shelby emerged as the showcase for Japanese prisoner agricultural participation. Initially established with 120 acres of tillable land, the operation expanded to 200 acres by mid-1945 based on production success. Military records confirm that Japanese prisoners assumed increasing managerial responsibilities. By April 1945, POWs managed daily operations with minimal American supervision, making decisions regarding planting schedules, irrigation timing, and harvest planning. The camp's 1945 production report documented impressive yields. 426,000 pounds of vegetables harvested between April and September, including 86,000 pounds of sweet potatoes, 64,000 pounds of cabbage, and 57,000 pounds of eggplant. The American military's unusual approach of consulting prisoners on crop selection revealed a pragmatism that shocked Japanese agricultural prisoners. At Camp Livingston, Louisiana, agricultural officers specifically requested Japanese input on suitable crops for the region's humid conditions. When prisoners suggested specific Asian vegetable varieties adaptable to local conditions, seeds were procured through university agricultural departments. This consultation process contradicted everything imperial military training had taught about American arrogance and disregard for Japanese knowledge. Captain Robert Jameson, agricultural coordinator at Camp Beale, wrote in his June 1945 progress report, "Japanese prisoners have introduced several growing techniques that improved our operations efficiency. Their method of closely spacing certain crops and interplanting compatible varieties has increased per-acre yields by approximately 18% compared to standard practices. We have documented these methods for potential broader application." The first harvest celebrations marked significant psychological transitions for many prisoners. At Camp Kahuku, the initial vegetable harvest in May 1945 yielded 37,000 pounds of produce from 40 acres, a productivity level that impressed even the American supervisors. Camp records note that prisoners organized a small celebration, preparing traditional dishes from a portion of the harvest allocated for prisoner consumption. This tangible result of their agricultural expertise provided a sense of accomplishment and purpose previously absent in prisoner life. Japanese growing techniques that improved American operations created another avenue for prisoner engagement. At Camp Clarinda, Iowa, Japanese prisoners introduced intensive spacing methods for certain vegetables that increased yield substantially. Their techniques for manual weed control, particularly in onion and carrot production, reduced labor requirements while improving quality. These contributions led to formalized information exchange programs at several camps, where prisoners documented traditional Japanese growing methods for American agricultural officers. Cultural exchange through agriculture developed organically as American guards observed prisoner farming techniques. At Camp Livingston, guards from rural backgrounds often engaged prisoners in agricultural discussions during field supervision. One guard, a cotton farmer from Alabama, later reported learning several transplanting techniques from prisoners that he implemented on his family farm after the war. These interactions humanized enemies in ways that formal programs could not achieve, building connections through shared agricultural interest despite language barriers. The economic aspects of American agriculture provided another educational dimension. Japanese prisoners, accustomed to government-controlled agricultural markets with fixed prices, encountered profit-motivated farming that responded to market demands. At Camp Beale, prisoners were shown the camp farm's financial records, revealing cost inputs, market prices, and profit calculations. This transparency, the clear accounting showing expenses, revenues, and returns, represented another form of agricultural democracy alien to Japanese experience. As summer approached, Camp Shelby's Japanese prisoners were producing more food than the entire camp could consume. Weekly harvest reports from June 1945 show consistent surpluses. 12,000 pounds of vegetables harvested weekly against camp consumption of 7,500 pounds. When prisoners inquired about this discrepancy, the answer delivered another ideological shock. The surplus would feed American military personnel and civilian communities in the surrounding region. The psychological impact registered clearly in censored prisoner correspondence. A letter from Corporal Toshio Watanabe, detained at Camp Beale, stated, "We grow more food than I've ever seen. The Americans tell us they sell what we grow to their own people. They say our vegetables feed their children, their enemies' children. This makes no sense to me, yet I see it happening." As harvest volumes increased through summer, a profound realization dawned gradually among agricultural prisoners. The vegetables they planted, tended, and harvested fed not just themselves and their captors, but American communities beyond camp boundaries. This democratization of food, the concept that agricultural production served general social welfare rather than military or elite priorities, contradicted the hierarchical food distribution system they had known in Imperial Japan. The revelation that enemy prisoners would be asked to grow food for everyone, including civilian populations, represented the most profound challenge yet to their understanding of society's proper organization. August 1945. Downtown Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Sergeant Kenji Yasuda stood motionless before the grocery store display, barely 10 feet from the street where American shoppers passed without noticing the Japanese prisoner under guard. The vegetables arranged in neat piles bore the unmistakable signs of his team's work. The distinctive purple-streaked Japanese eggplants, the perfectly formed heads of Napa cabbage, the long white daikon radishes that Americans rarely grew. A hand-lettered sign read, "Local Farm Fresh, 25c per pound." The American guard explained matter-of-factly, "These are from your fields at Camp Shelby. The store gets a delivery twice weekly." By late summer 1945, the distribution system for prisoner-grown produce had evolved into a sophisticated network connecting POW agricultural operations to military bases, local markets, and civilian communities. Military quartermaster records document this expansion in precise terms. Camp Shelby's agricultural operation shipped 3,500 pounds of vegetables weekly to Hattiesburg markets, 4,200 pounds to Keesler Airfield's mess halls, and retained approximately 7,500 pounds for camp consumption. This systematic dispersal of enemy-grown food throughout American communities represented a profound psychological weapon against imperial ideology. The distribution logistics revealed another dimension of American abundance. Refrigerated trucks, technology virtually non-existent in wartime Japan, transported vegetables from Camp Beale's fields to Sacramento markets 40 miles away without spoilage. The Camp Clarinda operation shipped sweet corn harvest to Des Moines, 100 miles distant, utilizing the refrigerated rail system that kept produce fresh for days. This cold chain infrastructure, maintaining freshness from field to retail display, represented organizational capacity beyond Japanese agricultural experience. The contrast with Japanese wartime food distribution could not have been more stark. Prisoner letters, heavily censored but preserved in military archives, reveal this comparison repeatedly. A Sergeant Yamamoto, detained at Camp Livingston, wrote, "In Japan now, farmers must surrender their harvest to military requisition. Civilians receive inadequate rations after military needs are met. Here, they distribute food to anyone with money to purchase, regardless of military status." POW witnesses to American food abundance frequently noted the casual waste that accompanied this system. Camp records from Beale document prisoner reactions to American sorting standards that rejected approximately 15% of harvested vegetables for cosmetic imperfections. These culls, slightly misshapen but perfectly edible produce, were typically used for livestock feed or camp composting operations rather than human consumption. To prisoners from a nation where food shortages had become severe by 1945, this selective approach to food quality seemed simultaneously admirable and horrifying. The visits to local markets where their produce was sold delivered particularly powerful impact. At Camp Clarinda, agricultural prisoners were occasionally permitted to accompany delivery trucks to local distribution points. There they witnessed American civilians, factory workers, office clerks, housewives, purchasing vegetables that would have been luxury items in wartime Japan. A supervised visit to the Camp Shelby commissary revealed prisoner-grown daikon radishes, considered staples in Japan, but exotic specialty items in America, selling for 30 cents per pound, approximately 15 minutes of average American factory worker wages. Personal testimonies of POWs regarding these market visits reveal their psychological impact. Corporal Takeshi Hayashi, detained at Camp Livingston, described in a censored letter, "I watched an American child purchase vegetables I grew with coins from her purse. She selected several items without hesitation or worry about cost. In Japan, my own daughter has likely not seen fresh vegetables in months. The Americans feed their children with produce grown by their enemies." American nutrition standards and dietary expectations provided another revelation. Military ration planning documents exposed to agricultural prisoners revealed standard caloric allocations: 3,400 daily calories for active adults, including 4 to 5 daily vegetable servings. These guidelines, even during wartime restrictions, exceeded Japanese civilian rations that had declined to approximately 1,500 daily calories by 1945, with fresh vegetables increasingly scarce in urban areas. Most striking to Japanese prisoners was the democratic nature of this nutrition standard. The expectation that ordinary citizens deserved diets meeting these specifications. The American food preservation technology on display in camp operations further demonstrated industrial capacity that outstripped Japanese capabilities. The Camp Beale operation included a small canning facility that processed surplus tomato harvests into preserved products with 2-year shelf stability. This facility, considered minor by American standards, could process 2,000 pounds of tomatoes daily, exceeding the capacity of many Japanese village cooperatives. The casual application of industrial technology to food preservation rather than military production suggested national priorities fundamentally different from Japan's. As summer waned, agricultural prisoners increasingly recognized that American food abundance functioned differently from Japanese scarcity. Captain Robert Williams, agricultural coordinator at Camp Shelby, noted in his August 1945 report, "Japanese prisoners initially believed our agricultural abundance must come at someone's expense, that wealth required deprivation elsewhere. They struggled to comprehend that production increases could benefit everyone simultaneously rather than merely redistributing fixed resources. The growing realization among prisoners that agricultural abundance was fundamental to American power accelerated after news of atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A Japanese lieutenant, previously convinced of eventual Japanese victory, confided to an interpreter at Camp Beale, "A nation that feeds its children with vegetables grown by enemy prisoners while simultaneously creating such destructive weapons operates on principles we cannot comprehend. Their abundance is not weakness, as we were taught, but the source of their strength. By September 1945, as Japan's surrender became reality, Japanese agricultural prisoners faced a profound reconsideration. The nation they would eventually return to had experienced systematic food shortages through the final war years. Agricultural production had declined approximately 32% from pre-war levels. Urban populations faced severe rationing, with actual distributions often falling below officially announced levels. As one prisoner at Camp Livingston observed after viewing Life magazine photographs of food conditions in Japan, "They asked us to grow food for everyone here, while at home, our leaders could not grow enough food for anyone." December 1945, Tokyo Harbor. The American transport vessel Marine Falcon creaked against the pier as Kenji Yasuda clutched a small canvas bag containing his most valuable possession, 3 ounces of vegetable seeds preserved from Camp Shelby's final harvest. The agricultural knowledge accumulated over 18 months of American captivity weighed nothing physically, yet represented the heaviest burden he carried home. As he descended the gangplank onto Japanese soil, the devastation spread before him. Tokyo's skeletal skyline, the hollowed-out warehouses, the visibly malnourished dock workers, confirmed that his agricultural education would be more valuable than any military training he had received. The repatriation of Japanese prisoners began shortly after the September 2, 1945 surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Military records document that approximately 100 Japanese agricultural prisoners returned during the initial repatriation phase, concentrated between October 1945 and February 1946. Their departure from American custody included an unusual component absent from other prisoner releases: agricultural knowledge transfer. Camp agricultural officers provided departing prisoners with translated pamphlets on American farming techniques, soil conservation practices, and mechanization methods developed by university extension programs. Documented accounts confirm that American authorities made extraordinary allowances for agricultural prisoners. Captain Lewis Mitchell's directive to POW camp administrators, dated September 12, 1945, specifically authorized reasonable quantities of non-invasive seed varieties, technical agricultural literature, and basic hand tools for prisoner transport to Japan. The unusually generous policy acknowledged the humanitarian benefit potential of agricultural knowledge transfer to a nation facing severe food shortages. Camp Shelby records indicate that departing agricultural prisoners received approximately 2 to 4 ounces of various vegetable seeds, particularly high-yielding American varieties of familiar Asian crops like eggplant, cabbage, and sweet potatoes. The arrival in devastated Japan delivered profound shock even to men mentally prepared for destruction. Agricultural production across Japan had declined 38% from pre-war levels, according to occupation authority assessments. Rice production, the critical staple, had fallen from pre-war annual yields of 10.8 million metric tons to approximately 6.7 million metric tons. Cultivated acreage had decreased nearly 17% as draft animals were requisitioned for military use, irrigation systems fell into disrepair, and male agricultural workers were conscripted. Urban populations, particularly in major cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, survived on official rations, providing fewer than 200 calories daily, with actual distributions frequently falling below announced quantities. The stark contrast between American abundance and Japanese devastation registered immediately with returning agricultural prisoners. Hiroshi Tanaka, returning to his Niigata Prefecture village in January 1946, documented in his personal diary, "The village that sent 7 strong young men to war welcomed back only me, delivering news of the others' deaths." The same village that once produced rice surplus now divides starvation among residents equally. The land appears exhausted, the tools primitive after what I have seen. American farms waste more food than my entire village now produces. These returning agricultural specialists encountered immediate challenges to implementing American techniques. The practical barriers proved enormous. absence of chemical fertilizers, non-existent mechanization, damaged irrigation systems, and depleted draft animal populations. Yet the most significant obstacles were institutional and cultural. Village agricultural committees, often controlled by older farmers who maintained traditional authority, frequently resisted innovations proposed by returned prisoners. Imperial agricultural bureaucracy, though now under occupation authority supervision, maintained rigid procedural approaches that complicated adaptation. Despite these obstacles, numerous accounts document returned prisoners applying American techniques, even with limited resources. Masao Iwata established a demonstration plot near Sendai using American row spacing techniques and intercropping methods that increased vegetable yields approximately 30% over traditional approaches. In Yamaguchi Prefecture, a cooperative established by 3 returned prisoners implemented crop rotation methods they learned at Camp Beale, incorporating soil-building legume crops into traditional rice farming cycles. The occupation authorities, particularly the Natural Resources section of SCAP, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, recognized the potential value of these returned agricultural prisoners. By mid-1946, occupation records document 73 former POWs, with agricultural backgrounds employed as technical advisors to SCAP's agricultural reform initiatives. These men, who had directly experienced American farming approaches, served as cultural and technical bridges between occupation agricultural specialists and Japanese farming communities. The most significant SCAP agricultural reform, land redistribution implemented between 1946 and 1950, found unexpected advocates among returned agricultural prisoners. Imperial Japan's pre-war tenant farming system, with approximately 45% of cultivated land controlled by absentee landlords, was dismantled through occupation reforms. Returned agricultural prisoners, who had witnessed American owner-operator farming models, frequently supported these controversial reforms despite opposition from traditional agricultural authorities. Former Corporal Toshio Watanabe, who had worked at Camp Beale's farm operation, became an agricultural instructor in Ibaraki Prefecture under SCAP's civil education program. His 1947 teaching materials, preserved in occupation archives, explicitly connected democratic land ownership with agricultural productivity. American farms produce abundant harvests not merely through machinery or chemicals, but because the farmer owns his land. When the harvest belongs entirely to the man who plants the seed, farming transforms from obligation to opportunity. By late 1946, food production remained Japan's most critical challenge. Urban starvation continued despite American food imports, particularly in the severe winter of 1946-1947, when caloric intake in major cities averaged approximately 1,350 daily calories per person. Against this backdrop, agricultural innovation took on urgency beyond mere productivity improvements. Traditional farming methods could not produce sufficient yields to prevent widespread malnutrition given Japan's limited arable land and growing population. In this environment, returned agricultural prisoners increasingly found receptive audiences for techniques previously rejected as foreign impositions. A demonstration farm established near Yokohama by former POWs in spring 1947 attracted over 3,000 visiting farmers within its first operational season. Its techniques, systematic crop rotation, intensive spacing methods learned in American camps, companion planting approaches, delivered approximately 37% yield improvements over comparable traditional methods. As one visiting farmer reportedly observed, "These men learned how Americans could grow enough food for everyone. Perhaps we should listen." June 1955. Kanto Agricultural Cooperative, Ibaraki Prefecture. The John Deere tractor navigated precise rows under Kenji Yasuda's expert hand, leaving perfectly furrowed soil in its wake. The machine, purchased through a cooperative arrangement among 37 farmers, represented more than mechanical efficiency. It embodied the transformation Yasuda had championed since returning from American captivity a decade earlier. Farmers from surrounding villages gathered to observe the demonstration, many seeing mechanized planting for the first time. "The tractor doesn't care who your ancestors were," Yasuda explained to the assembled farmers. "It works the same for everyone. In America, I learned that soil responds to science, not tradition. The integration of American agricultural techniques into post-war Japanese farming accelerated through the 1950s, creating productive capacity previously considered impossible on Japan's limited arable land. Agricultural statistics documented this remarkable transformation in precise terms. Rice production, which had fallen to 6.7 million metric tons in 1945, reached 12.3 million metric tons by 1955, exceeding pre-war levels despite cultivating less total land. Vegetable production similarly surged, increasing 78% between 1947 and 1957. These productivity improvements, achieved on approximately 13.1 million acres of cultivated land, less than 15% of Japan's total area, represented agricultural efficiency that rivaled global leaders. Former POWs played documented roles in this agricultural revolution. Government agricultural extension records from 1950-1960 identify 327 former prisoners with agricultural backgrounds serving as registered farming instructors through prefecture-level programs. These men, who had experienced American techniques firsthand, transmitted this knowledge through demonstration plots, technical workshops, and cooperative organizations. A 1958 Ministry of Agriculture survey credited these instructors with introducing improved techniques to approximately 115,000 individual farmers. The children and grandchildren of agricultural POWs frequently continued this innovation legacy. Hiroshi Tanaka's son established one of Japan's first commercial greenhouse operations in Niigata Prefecture, adapting technology his father had first encountered at Camp Kahuku. The operation's 1957 production records show year-round vegetable harvests producing approximately 22 metric tons annually from just 0.3 hectares, productivity levels impossible under traditional seasonal farming. By 1960, similar operations had spread throughout Japan, with over 4,700 hectares under protected cultivation. Mechanization of Japanese agriculture, influenced by American models, transformed rural landscapes. Tractor adoption statistics tell this story clearly, from fewer than 5,000 tractors nationwide in 1945 to over 230,000 by 1960. The initial barrier, Japan's small field sizes poorly suited to American-scale equipment, found solution through cooperative ownership arrangements often championed by former POWs familiar with American farm credit systems. These arrangements allowed multiple small farmers to share equipment costs, making mechanization economically viable despite field sizes averaging just 1.2 acres. In Yamagata Prefecture, Masao Iwata established a machinery cooperative in 1953 that grew to serve 142 member farms by 1960. The cooperative's records show remarkable efficiency improvements. A rice harvest that previously required 27 labor days per hectare using traditional methods required just 8 labor days with shared mechanical equipment. This labor efficiency helped address rural depopulation as Japan's industrial economy expanded, allowing fewer farmers to feed more urban workers. Personal testimonies from former POWs decades later consistently identified their agricultural captivity as transformative. In a 1975 national radio interview, Toshio Watanabe, by then a respected agricultural leader in Chiba Prefecture, reflected, "When Americans asked us to grow food for everyone, not just ourselves or the military, it seemed naive. Only later did I understand this represented an entirely different conception of agriculture's purpose. This simple difference contained an entire philosophy about society's organization. Statistical evidence confirms the remarkable transformation. Japanese agricultural productivity increased approximately 300% between 1945 and 1965, despite cultivating less total acreage. The land redistribution program, completed by 1950, converted tenant farmers into owner-operators, with land ownership increasing from 54% to 94% of cultivated area. This democratization of land mirrored the American model that former POWs had witnessed. Chemical fertilizer usage, virtually non-existent immediately after the war, reached 356 kilograms per hectare by 1960, among the world's highest application rates. The philosophical shift from scarcity mindset to productivity focus represented the deepest transformation. Pre-war Japanese agriculture operated within a framework that accepted natural limitations and distributed scarcity according to social hierarchy. The post-war approach, significantly influenced by American models introduced through occupation reforms and former POWs, rejected these limitations. Yasuhiro Nakasone, who would later become Prime Minister, observed in a 1960 Diet speech, "Our agricultural transformation mirrors our broader societal change, from accepting what seems destined to creating what was previously impossible." Modern Japanese agriculture's efficiency and technological advancement eventually surpassed even American standards in certain sectors. By the 1970s, Japanese rice yields averaged 5.8 metric tons per hectare, compared to American yields of 5.2 metric tons. Greenhouse vegetable production achieved among the world's highest per-acre yields. The nation with extremely limited arable land, just 0.03 hectares per capita compared to America's 0.59 hectares, achieved food self-sufficiency rates exceeding 70% for its dense population. In 1982, agricultural journalist Takashi Kojima interviewed 12 former POWs who had worked on American prison farms during World War II. Their consensus assessment proved striking, as one former prisoner who had become an agricultural cooperative president explained, "The most important crop we cultivated in American camps wasn't vegetables. It was the idea that farming serves people, not power, that abundance comes through innovation, not conquest, that growing food for everyone creates more for each person." The seeds planted in prisoner of war camps yielded harvests across generations. Children raised on farms established by former POWs inherited not just land, but conceptual frameworks about agriculture's purpose. The democratic approach to food production, growing for communities rather than institutions, became foundational to modern Japanese agriculture. The nation's famed attention to food quality, innovative growing methods, and intensive land utilization can be traced partially to this transformative prison experience. What began in bewilderment, enemy captors asking prisoners for agricultural advice, culminated in philosophical transformation. The American request to grow food for everyone contained revolutionary implications for men raised in hierarchical systems. The seemingly simple question of who deserves to eat well, who should benefit from agricultural abundance, challenged fundamental assumptions about society's proper organization. The most unlikely agricultural instructors, Japanese soldiers captured in a war of aggression, returned home carrying seeds both literal and metaphorical. They planted varieties that thrived in Japanese soil and ideas that transformed Japanese society. These men had experienced firsthand that abundance came not through conquest, but through production, not through dominance, but through innovation. In fields across post-war Japan, the harvest of this understanding continues to nourish a nation stunned when Americans ask them to grow food for everyone,